Ansel Adams is probably the world's most famous photographer. In fact, people probably know his name better than most of his work. I remember when I was younger, I said I wanted to take up photography and probably do landscapes like Ansel Adams, and to be honest, even then I didn't even know a specific photo he was famous for. I just knew his name and that his was the name to say. There was a time, however, when he was not famous, when he was still working on his craft. And just like how a band is broken to the public via radio play, Ansel Adams broke out to the public with one photo in particular, and that would be Monolith, the Face of Half Dome. It's hard to believe that we're approaching 100 years since this photo was taken at Yosemite's LeConte Gully. It was on April 10th, 1927 when Adams and his family clambered up the trail to a location called the Diving Board, a rock face on the west side of Half Dome some 3,500 feet from the ground, to capture this image one chilly spring morning. This was the ideal spot to frame Half Dome, the park's iconic granite summit rising some 5,000 feet from the valley's floor. However, on the way to their post, Adams had already taken several photos, leaving him with only 2 glass plates left for Half Dome, the very reason for the trip. He had in his pack a 6.5 by 8.5 Corona View camera, some different lenses and filters, panchromatic plates, and a large wooden tripod. They arrived at noon, and any photographer would know that noon light isn't the best light for a scene, so he waited. Adams waited a little over 2 hours for the light to hit the face of the rock just right. He had to get it correct since he only had 2 glass plates left to shoot with. Remember, this was almost 100 years ago. Cameras were very different back then. It was much easier to mess up a shot than it is today. Even a gust of wind could ruin an image. But Adams was an expert by this time. At the young age of 25, Adams actually started out as a musician, being a well-accomplished pianist. He had spent winters in San Francisco teaching music lessons and performing as part of the Melambi Trio, but after being tasked by his mentor to capture some black and white images to sell, Adams took to photography and the music took a back seat. He had dabbled with photography before, having been gifted a Kodak Brownie at the age of 14. In fact, he'd already taken several photos of Half Dome in his youth, but it was on that spring afternoon in 1927 that he had set out to achieve his ultimate goal of capturing it in the way he saw it in his mind's eye and adding it to his professional portfolio. Adams was familiar with a technique called photogenia, which is a practice of intentionally manipulating lighting, exposure, and printing to communicate meaning. This visualization exercise helped him achieve the final look of his images, seeing what he wanted in his mind first, and figuring out a way to manipulate the process in both shooting and development to achieve it. This visualization brings a type of storytelling and emotional satisfaction to the process, being able to carefully control aspects of the scene, the emulsion, filters, and developmental process to create a coherent environment which leads the viewer's eye through the image. When the light was ready and the finished product was fresh in his mind, Adams was ready to shoot. He put a yellow filter over the lens to subtly darken the blue sky, but almost as soon as he released the shutter, he knew something was wrong. Quote, "I began to realize why I'm not creating anything of what I feel, because I know the shadow on the cliff is going to be like the sky. It's going to be gray," he said. Continuing, "It will be an accurate picture of Half Dome, but it won't have the emotional quality to it." To remedy this, Adams prepared a second exposure using a deep red filter that would darken the sky almost to black. This would emphasize the white snow on Half Dome's cliff face. This red filter made all the difference. Adams quickly realized in the developing process that Monolith, the face of Half Dome, was his first really fine photograph, and marked his first successful visualization, a term he used for carefully determining all elements of a photograph before ever releasing the shutter. He said about this realization, "I began to think about how the print was to appear, and it would transmit any of the feeling of the monumental shape before me in terms of its expressive emotional quality. I realized that only a deep red filter would give me anything approaching the effect I felt emotionally." Eventually, this led to the creation of the zone system. Adams and a comrade created a structured way photographers could use darkroom and development techniques to achieve their own visualizations. This system worked to carefully control exposure and development of the negative by what's called dodging and burning, or selectively brightening and darkening of certain areas. Adams created 10 different zones to describe a numerical range of the whitest and blackest areas of photos. 0 in the zone system would represent pure black, no detail. Zone 5 is middle gray, and Zone 10 is pure white, no detail. It's a system still used today in all forms of photography, including digital photography and videography. The negative for Half Dome is still around to this day, having survived a fire in 1937 when a darkroom caught ablaze. Having just arrived back from a 4-day trip with some friends to Yosemite, the group became aware of the fire and managed to salvage what they could of the negatives. Even today, the glass plate negative is still printable. The image of Monolith, the face of Half Dome, was used by the Sierra Club as a visual aid for the environmental movement. It helped to break Ansel Adams' name to the public, enduring a legacy that's still relevant even to this day. Because of Monolith, Adams' commercial and artistic career took off, leading him to become recognized as possibly the greatest and most well-known photographer of all time.